So the enforcement of monogamy, which is not a biblical principle, has had some very interesting consequences. And one of the consequences has been to set men and women against one another. Because what happens when a woman effectively controls the sexual activity of her husband simply by virtue of the fact that she has married him, is that she gradually throughout the marriage loses respect for this man, or rather loses desire for this man, because it is in a woman's nature to need a level of competition in her life. And so her husband now has become something of a eunuch. Now perhaps they are happy, he is happy to be with only his wife. But all the men that I've known, after a few years, a man is very often ready to take a second wife, or at least to have a concubine. This is very common, and it's often the case in the Bible, of course. It wouldn't qualify you to preach in Paul's church, but not everybody perhaps should be applying for that job anyway. And so then the woman acquires a certain level of power over her husband, effectively through contract, through the way that the church brought out the Book of Common Prayer and the marriage vows, which were clearly monogamous in their nature, but they're not. That's not Bible. You see, the Book of Common Prayer. Many people know the book of, or came to know the Book of Common Prayer quite well, because it was often spoken. But it misquotes the Bible in many places, or it's not. It's just not Bible. It sounds like Bible, but the hand of man has been busy in it, inevitably. And so the household becomes fractious, you see. Whereas in other times, men would have multiple partners and may have children with different women. And so the family became more of a dynamic affair, as it were. And the wives, to some extent, competed, and the concubines competed for the attention of the man. I mean, this would have been very pleasing to any man, if one can imagine having women competing for one's attention. I think that would go down very nicely with many of my brothers. You see, in that way, a man retains his virility. You see, his stones have not been clipped. He's not been made into a eunuch, or as they sometimes say, beta-sized, reduced from the status of warrior. Sometimes they call them alpha male, kind of a go-getter, and somebody living a little bit on the edge, and living as a man, to something more far tamer. And it doesn't sit well with our nature, and it doesn't sit well with the nature of women either. That's the problem, although they don't know it, perhaps, or I'm sure some women do. That's why many times, sexually active and attractive women will prefer the kind of bad boys, they call them. Because the traits of a family man are dull, actually, in our modern conception of the idea, but they wouldn't have been dull in the olden days, because the man wasn't under the authority of his wife in the way that he is in the modern world. And we see the results of it. I mean, marriages, most of them end in divorce initiated by women. It's an absolute disaster, because the whole concept of marriage has been misconstrued. Man polygamous, woman monogamous. That's a very old saying, but it's a true saying, you understand. We have to understand it. A woman must be pure and monogamous. Otherwise, then the man must pursue paternity investigations to ensure that the offspring are his. That wouldn't have been possible in ancient times. I mean, now it's supposedly possible if one can trust the results of the laboratories. And really, there's many of my brothers and sisters, and myself included, that should really be following this path, because it is known since for many years it's been understood that women will often seek a higher status man if they have the opportunity, and become impregnated by that man, and then use the husband as the cash cow, as it were, to finance the family, to finance the issue of that other man. It's just the way that the system works. Somehow women are kind of programmed to find a strong man, and unfortunately they marry somebody, and then because of the system he is automatically reduced into the role of a servant, and she no longer can view him as a high value male. So she goes outside of the marriage, finds some bad boy, and then makes the other male raise him. He becomes a cuckold, effectively. That's most families, many families these days. Now, you know, of course, the percentage of children that are not of the biological father's child, as it were, is said to be about 30%, which is pretty high, I would say, but I don't know how they get those statistics. I suppose they do have ways of doing it. I mean, it must be rather difficult because, of course, many people won't know this. Women are, you know, they're not going to come up with this information, I'm sorry. Women are smart, really. They can run rings around most men, and I'm sure my brothers understand this. We have to be very wary, and we are kind of programmed not to be, almost, and women know it. So, you know, we have to beware in this marketplace and in this life. But it's just, you know, the Bible being misused to vilify and reduce men, powerful, independent men, doing the stuff that we do. And there's nothing wrong with that stuff, really. Using our strength, using our muscles, using the keenness of our minds to solve problems, you know. Being resolute and stoic in the face of adversity. They're kind of, you know, that stuff that we should have been taught, but we've been brought up by fathers who themselves had been cuckolded effectively, even though the children may be natural, of course, and in all likelihood are, you know, at that rate, you know, 70% of occasions they would be. if those statistics can be relied upon. But it's just another area, you see. And I was rereading the Apocrypha, the first book of Esdras, chapters 3 and 4. This very interesting account of which is the more powerful in the land, whether it be wine, whether it be the king, or whether it be women. And I've noticed that the final response, women, adds then, but surely the victory lies with the truth. And so ultimately, the truth is the victor of all, because in the summary, wine is wicked, kings are wicked, and women are wicked, and all men upon earth are wicked, but the truth shall stand forever. So it's a celebration of our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ, who is the truth. So that has to be taken into consideration, though, when you think about it, that the power of women was second only to the power of Jesus Christ, according to that verse. You know, I don't know. I mean, that's an interpretation of that verse. Okay, it's the Apocrypha. I'm not going to tie my horse to it, but it's an interest. It just makes me wonder. Really, I think we underestimate their power, and unfortunately, we men have given up our power to them, and we can't do that. We have to sort of stand up, really, and rally and stop it. And I think this is happening gradually. Nobody's happy with the situation as it stands, you see. So, you know, we men, we need to man up, really, and start behaving, I suppose you could say, badly. But it's just it's what men do. There's nothing wrong with it, as long as it's done in an honourable manner. You know, everything must be done in obsequience to biblical principles of honesty and truth. We can't be practicing deception, because then that becomes hiding something from God, and then we are truly guilty. No. We must meditate on our actions very carefully, but understand that we are free to do as we please, ultimately. In this sphere, certainly. And that, you know, once that starts to happen, then women will start to fall back into their proper place. But at the moment, we have generations of damaged people, you know, because they've come from damaged childhoods. I've come from a damaged childhood, and you know, we haven't been brought up really at all on any kind of true biblical principles. You know, of course, some people may have been brought up in the church, but I personally see that as almost as being a disadvantage, because I've spoken to several people who claim that they were saved at the age of like 10 or 11 or something like that. And I can't understand. I don't think they've gone through the veil in the way that can happen to a man when he falls to his knees, or a woman when she falls to her knees in full life. There's the risk, you see, that it's been inherited from the family. And I don't know whether that's... You know, there are arguments for it, of course, but I suppose you would have to have some kind of revelation. I believe even the Amish I think they get a 2-year period during which they can decide not to follow the faith, but it's probably just a formality. I don't know much about their practices. I was very struck when I went to see the Christadelphians, and I went to a few of their meetings to see if they would be any good. in terms of following the Bible and, having some nice songs together and some fellowship. But I felt there was a very cultish vibe amongst those people and the young people, and there were, several young people there, were they all had those kind of glazed eyes, because they come from Christadelphian families, and that they see that that's what sets them apart, and their parents will have told them that, and they mix with other Christadelphians. And I inquired about this. I said, well, how can I become a Christadelphian when most of you were born into Christadelphian families? How many people here have converted to Christadelphianism? And the lady that I was speaking to looked around, and probably would have been 100 people in the room, and she said she thought there might be one. I think, I don't know whether she was completely sure about it, but certainly it was no more than one. I mean, that's a clear sign of a cult, isn't it? You see, that's the problem. You get brought up as a Baptist, and you become a Baptist at the age of 15 or 16. It's not your fault, for heaven's sake. But I think it can be a mental trap in a way, because a man has to walk his own path and allow his steps to be guided by God. You can't inherit that. There's the story of the prodigal son, of course. I guess there's the son that remains at home also, is a saved man. That's the way I would see it. God bless.